My stepdaughter called me a servant in front of her friends but was shocked when I revealed the truth. "Don't you dare come to my graduation ceremony." Kathryn's voice was sharp, panicked. "If a plain old lady like you shows up, everyone will laugh at me. It's my big day, so stay away." "Hey, old lady, where are you leaving a silly note like that and thinking you'll get away with it? Come home right now." I could hear Henry's voice too. Both were frantic. "My name is Teresa Charles. I'm a 42-year-old housewife. I've been working part-time at a local real estate agency, raising Kathryn, and doing household chores for over a decade. I married Henry 15 years ago. He had Kathryn from his previous marriage. I met Henry at work before we got married. I was working at a construction company and Henry was there for sales. Our company was tough on contractors, but Henry always had a smile and a positive attitude. I once recommended a product he was selling to my company, and as a result, his company got the contract. This led to us going out for meals several times, deepening our relationship. Eventually, he proposed, and I happily accepted. I quit my job just before our wedding. Henry confessed that he was living alone with his 9-year-old daughter. At first, I thought it was a lie, but it was true. I met Kathryn a week before the ceremony. She was shy, hiding behind Henry and not coming out in front of me. That's when I decided I would take care of her until she graduated high school. I couldn't forget Kathryn's anxious eyes peeking out from behind Henry. Despite my family's strong disapproval, I decided to marry Henry. It was my first marriage, and my father was especially furious, saying I was being mocked. But I went against their wishes and married Henry. If I had listened to my parents, I might have avoided the troubles that were about to come. It's been 15 years since I got married. Kathryn is now 16 and about to graduate from high school. Normally this would be a joyful moment, but I couldn't feel happy. I remembered my hope of making her a respectable adult when I decided to marry Henry. "Hey, old lady, where's my t-shirt? Did you steal it?" Kathryn started calling me old lady 3 years after we began living together. She used to be kind, but then she suddenly became rude. "Is this the t-shirt you're looking for?" I handed her the shirt from the folded laundry. "Why did you wash it? What if it shrinks? Normally you should take it to the cleaners. You're so clueless, really, so dense." I had hand-washed and air-dried the t-shirt, thinking it would be damaged at the cleaners, but I couldn't explain this to Kathryn. All I could do was apologize. Kathryn snatched the shirt from my hand, muttering, "You're so useless," before walking away. Her words pierced my heart. I couldn't argue back and just bowed my head. I didn't understand why Kathryn had become so harsh with me. At first, I thought it was because she was teased about her father's remarriage, but that didn't seem to be the case. Around the same time, Henry's attitude towards me also changed. He used to smile a lot, like when he was selling, but lately he stopped smiling at home and became more sullen. He even started calling me, "Hey, you." Kathryn's behavior seemed to follow his lead. I thought maybe I was lacking in some way, so I tried harder with the housework and took extra care of Kathryn. I wanted her to grow up to be a respectable adult, but contrary to my hopes, Kathryn's attitude towards me worsened day by day. Calling me old lady became the norm for her. I never heard words of gratitude from Kathryn anymore. What was strange was that at parent-teacher conferences in elementary school, Kathryn's behavior was normal, and she wasn't rude at all. Henry talked normally with Kathryn, even smiling sometimes. This meant that her terrible behavior was directed only at me, which hurt me even more. Whenever I tried to talk to Henry, his attitude was distant, completely different from before. I had no one to confide in, and I felt more and more isolated in my own home. Since middle school, Kathryn stopped telling me about school, and Henry would attend school events. I had to learn about the schedule for school events from my neighbors. Henry and Kathryn seemed to get along well, going out together sometimes. I wanted to be treated as family by Henry and Kathryn, too. I had always wanted to live happily together. I never imagined it would be this painful to have that wish unfulfilled. Henry's attitude towards me continued to worsen. "Dust is piling up on the stairs. Clean it up. You're a stay-at-home wife, aren't you? The toilet paper is almost out. Are you even cleaning the bathroom? You're dense, you know." I frequently received such rejoinders from Henry. Originally, when we first got married, we both shared household chores. Henry had been doing housework while living with Kathryn, and he was happy at first to share the chores with me. But now I do all the housework. Henry used to say it was wrong for a stay-at-home wife to do all the housework. Kathryn was an easy child to take care of, but this somehow made things worse for me. When I tried talking to Henry, he just dismissed it as my lack of effort. In the end, everything was my fault. The more I tried talking to Henry, the heavier my heart felt. He would nitpick my housekeeping, constantly criticizing me. "You can't even clean properly. No improvement after all these years. Do you lack learning ability?" Henry looked down on me with disdain. All I could do was apologize. I'm sorry, I'll try harder. Please forgive me." Henry sighed dramatically as if exasperated. "Even if you try hard, you won't be able to do it. That's why you get scolded. Always saying you'll do it, but have you ever?" Henry's words kept chipping away at my heart as time passed. I was worn out, and Kathryn turned 19. I was curious about her plans after graduation, but she wouldn't tell me, and neither would Henry. By then, I had stopped talking to Henry and Kathryn unless it was necessary. One day, I overheard Kathryn and Henry discussing her future. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I wanted to know, so I listened. "I got it. I could go to college on a recommendation, and I even got a scholarship. Then thanks, Dad. Thank you." I could hear the joy in Kathryn's voice. She never spoke to me like that. "Good for you. It's the result of your efforts. All the housework we dumped on that dense housekeeper was worth it." Were they referring to me as the housekeeper? Yeah, she was a good outlet for stress. I heard their mocking laughter quietly. I left and locked myself in the bathroom, the only place I could be alone. I crouched there, holding my head, and cried. To think that Henry and Kathryn saw me in such a light. I had endured for the past 12 years being Kathryn's mother and Henry's wife. Even when my heart felt like it was breaking, I forced myself to keep going. Even when I felt at my limit, there were times I felt I couldn't get up, but I made myself do it, making lunch boxes, preparing breakfast, doing laundry, and other housework. It hurt to even lie down, but if I did that, I feared I would never be needed by Henry and Kathryn again. Driven by this fear, I continued to live in exhaustion. Honestly, I don't remember much about this period. One day after shopping, a neighbor told me something shocking. Tomorrow was Kathryn's high school graduation. I couldn't admit I didn't know, so I just smiled vaguely and left. As soon as I got home, I collapsed onto the sofa. I had always thought about making Kathryn a respectable adult, and her graduation from high school was supposed to be a milestone for that. Again, I was the only one left out in this house. I'm not allowed to have a smartphone or use a computer. The only thing I have is a simple flip phone that can only make calls. Since Henry handles all the school communications, I don't have any mom friends or any way to get information about the school. Still, I learned about sports days and recitals from neighbors or overheard children's conversations and secretly attended them. I wanted to attend Kathryn's high school graduation and celebrate her step into adulthood. While I was crying on the sofa, Kathryn came home from school. "Old lady, why are you loafing around? You're so gloomy. You make the whole house dark. Can't you do something about it?" Kathryn glared at me. If she had told me the date of the graduation, I wouldn't have felt this way. For the first time, I felt anger rising from the depths of my heart. "So the graduation is tomorrow? Seems you didn't tell me about it," I said with a tone of blame. Kathryn looked a bit startled by my words, but then sighed dramatically. "So what? You're not going to the graduation anyway, so you don't need to know the date." I was surprised. I never said I wasn't going to the graduation. "Don't come. If a plain old lady like you comes, you'll just be a laughingstock. It's my big day. Do not come." Kathryn's words made me feel dizzy. She didn't think of me as family. To her, I was an embarrassing presence. Just this once, I had hoped for forgiveness, but it was denied. Her words pierced my heart. I was truly just a nuisance, clearly told so by Kathryn herself. That night, Henry came home with a suit and a dry cleaner bag. He had taken his suit to the cleaners himself without asking me, of course. He knew about Kathryn's graduation. When I saw the suit, Henry commented, "Right, you didn't hear about it from Kathryn." He looked at me with a mix of pity and a smirk. I realized I was the least needed in this house. Thinking I was part of the family was just my delusion. At that moment, I realized my heart had reached its limit long ago, so I decided to end my role as a family member. The next day, Henry and Kathryn left together for her high school graduation. I was left behind, and Henry even told me not to bother with dinner as they would eat out. I wasn't invited. The old me would have just silently accepted this treatment, but those days were over. I decided to leave this house, It was a decision I made last night. As soon as they left, I quickly packed my things, left a note, and left the house. I couldn't be part of Henry and Kathryn's family anymore. I decided to seek refuge at my parents' house, a 3-hour train ride away. There, I would prepare to sever ties with Henry and Kathryn. The note I left stated my wish to cut familial ties and live independently, and that further details should be discussed through a lawyer. I hadn't found a lawyer yet, but I knew my father could recommend one. My family is wealthy and owns a lot of land. My father is a well-known figure in the area and owns considerable real estate. I remembered meeting a lawyer during a New Year's greeting at home, so I knew my father could help. Another task I needed to do was sell the house where Henry and Kathryn currently lived. This house was built on land owned by my father, and the construction was funded by him as a wedding gift for me. I have been repaying my father slowly with the money I earned from my real estate job, which he had also helped me get. The house, including the land, is owned by my father and legally registered in his name. At the time, Henry and I thought the house was a gift and never asked about the ownership because he was afraid of offending my father and losing the gift. Henry was the classic home tyrant, harsh to those he saw as weaker but submissive to those above him. I told my father everything that had happened. As I spoke, tears flowed uncontrollably, and I had to pause several times due to sobbing, but my father listened until the end. I saw tears in his eyes too. The most relieving part was that my father didn't criticize my initial decision to marry Henry. In the end, my father said, "You've been through a lot." Afterward, he made several phone calls, and lawyers and real estate managers came to the house. Everything happened quickly from there. It was decided that the house would be demolished, and the demolition was scheduled for a week later. In the note I left, I wrote, "Please leave within a week." My father commented sarcastically, "That's quite kind of you." For me, it was just to avoid any later complaints. During the week, I consulted with the lawyer about the divorce. I also shared the whole story with my mother, and we cried together. I can't forget the determined look on my mother's face. I had also discussed my plans with my father. The priority was to establish a new foundation for my life. It took courage to talk to my parents, and it was painful, but once I did, my heart felt lighter for the first time in 12 years. I slept soundly. 2 weeks later, while I was staying at my parents' house, I received a call on my cell phone. As expected, it was Kathryn. Honestly, I didn't want to talk to her, remembering how she had treated me. A black stain spread in my heart. I decided to ignore the call, but they didn't stop. There were several from Henry as well. They were probably calling about the note I left or the demolition. For 12 years, Henry and Kathryn called me old lady, exploited my efforts, and treated me like a tool. I endured such treatment for a long time. The thought of dealing with them again made me shudder, but I knew I needed to settle the past to move forward. Without confronting them, I wouldn't feel at peace. I felt I owed them a proper response, so I steeled myself and answered the phone. "Hey, old lady, where are you right now?" Kathryn's screeching voice pierced my ears, hurried and panicked. "Leaving such a ridiculous note, do you think you'll be forgiven? Where are you now? Come back home right now." I could hear Henry's voice as well. They both seemed frantic. I imagined Kathryn's reaction when she returned from her graduation ceremony to find no old lady to vent her stress on, and the note about the divorce in the house. I couldn't help but smile faintly at Kathryn's panic. "Hey, pause for a moment. Would you care to support us? Like this video and subscribe for more. Now let's dive back into the story." Who is this, please?" I asked. Kathryn seemed taken aback by my response and stumbled over her words. I hung up the phone. Afterward, I called the real estate management company to confirm when the demolition would start. It was scheduled for tomorrow as planned, and Henry had already been informed. I requested to postpone the demolition to the day after tomorrow and asked them to inform Henry about the delay. This gave them one more day. Henry would probably come here, and that's when I would deliver my final message to Henry and Kathryn. I ignored the dozens of calls from them. The next day, around noon, I heard the doorbell ring and knocking on the door. It must be Henry and Kathryn. They would have wanted to come earlier, but the journey here could be long due to poor connections. Henry and Kathryn appeared panting heavily, evidently having rushed here. I had arranged for my parents to stay in another room, so it seemed like I was the only one at home. I led Henry and Kathryn into the living room. Henry entered hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable around my father. My father is wealthy, well-respected, and has a commanding presence, making him a higher authority than Henry. On the other hand, Kathryn didn't seem intimidated at all. She appeared determined to overpower me and bring me back home. Kathryn plopped down on a chair in the living room, crossing her legs and silently gesturing for me to sit opposite her. I took my time preparing tea, moving leisurely before finally sitting across from her. Growing impatient, Kathryn addressed me. "What's the meaning of all this?" Henry, sitting next to her, placed the note I had left on the table. I didn't react and just met Kathryn's gaze silently. She was the first to look away, attempting to dispel the awkwardness with a laugh. "What was that? Who was this act yesterday? Pretty poor performance." I continued to stare at Kathryn silently. She became visibly uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. "Look, it's no use. A dumb old lady like you can't survive without us. You're nothing but trash." I almost reacted to her harsh words, but restrained myself, noticing the tremble in her voice. Kathryn was bluffing. Henry had been silent, just watching how things unfolded. "Stop being stubborn and come back home," Kathryn said, trying to confuse and coax me back with her cruel words. As Kathryn became more agitated, I responded calmly. "I don't have a family, do I? Oh, I have parents, but you two are not my family, are you?" Kathryn, clearly out of her element, raised her voice. "What are you saying? Dad and I are your family, right? Right, Dad?" Kathryn, feeling at a disadvantage alone, sought support from Henry. Henry looked around nervously, and once he confirmed they were alone, turned to me with newfound bravado. "That's right. You can't live without us, just like Kathryn says. So you're coming back," Henry said, getting bossy all of a sudden when he noticed my parents were nowhere to be seen. Looking back on it now, what a small-spirited man he is. "Like I said, I have no family," I replied firmly. No matter what Henry and Kathryn said, I would continue to treat them as strangers. They were not my family. If they were, they wouldn't have treated me like a slave. A true family supports and helps each other, especially when someone is in trouble. But Henry and Kathryn are different. For 12 years, they treated me like a servant for their stress. They insisted this was normal, oblivious to how wrong and cruel it was, unconsciously oppressing me. I marvel at how I endured it for 12 years, almost impressed with myself. It started when I saw Kathryn peeking out from behind Henry's back. I had promised myself to raise her to be a decent adult. I endured and served them for this promise, at least until Kathryn graduated high school. I had decided that Kathryn's high school graduation and her moving on would draw the end of our relationship. I had held a faint hope that if Henry and Kathryn changed their ways and improved their attitudes towards me by the time of her graduation, I would continue with them as a family, but they betrayed my expectations, leading to this situation. Everything was decided the day before the graduation ceremony, so now I confront them with the appropriate attitude. Henry and Kathryn are no longer my family, and I will not treat them as such. Realizing the significance of my treating them as strangers, Kathryn altered her approach. "We're family, aren't we, Mom? Stop this silly act, please," she said, switching from calling me old lady to Mom. Realizing her usual tactics wouldn't work, Henry swallowed hard and watched intently. "Even though you're not my birth mother, we've lived together all this time, so please listen to my request," Kathryn pleaded, her previously defiant posture changing to one more pleading. "I have no obligation to respond to requests from someone who isn't family," I replied, keeping my composure and emotional distance. Tears appeared in Kathryn's eyes as she looked at me desperately. "Please listen to me. The note you left, it's not true, right? You can't be selling the house. It's not serious, right? Because you're part of our family." Kathryn's use of the term "mom" made my skin crawl, especially since her main concern seemed to be the house. She was anxious about losing the house, not about losing me. No matter how much Kathryn pleaded, my feelings remained unchanged. She lowered her face, apparently crying. "This is some kind of joke, right? You can't be serious," Henry said, upset by Kathryn's tears, and turned his anger towards me. "What's with that note? Come back right now and stop the demolition." Henry spoke rapidly, driven by anger. "I can't do that. The decision has been made," I said in a restrained voice. "Do you think you can get away with doing this to your family?" Henry demanded. That's why I've been saying we're not family, I replied. Neither Henry nor Kathryn seemed willing to listen. Please understand, we're not family. I wondered how many times I had to repeat the same thing. Suddenly, Henry stood up and slammed his fist on the table. Don't joke with me! I was startled but managed not to react. Who's joking? After not treating me as a family for 12 years, you can't suddenly expect me to act like one. It's impossible. My voice was harsher than I intended. I'm angry too, though I didn't show it. My anger was bubbling up inside me like magma about to erupt. Henry and Kathryn's selfish actions were unforgivable. They trampled on my 12 years of suffering and efforts to be part of the family. I tried to become a family with Henry and Kathryn, but they mocked and used me. They wouldn't understand how lonely and painful it was to be left out. I wished so many times to be treated like family, but my wish never came true. It took me 12 years to give up, despite my continuous efforts as Kathryn's mother. This is the outcome. A self-mocking smile appeared on my face, seeing my dry smile. Henry and Kathryn stared at me in shock. Henry seemed to lose his strength and slumped into the chair. These two, far from understanding my feelings, tried to use me until the very end. No matter how much I cared for them, they never cared for me. Even though I cherished them, they never cherished me. When they found themselves in trouble, they said things like, "We're family," but they never meant it. They just wanted to use me. It's just too convenient. I felt not just a headache, but even nausea. Why did I keep tolerating these people for 12 years? It's strange to think back on it, but there's no point in reflecting now. There's no future for the three of us together anymore. All I can do is make Henry and Kathryn acknowledge their guilt and pay for it. I won't expect or trust anything from Kathryn or Henry anymore. Henry stood up and apologized. I'm sorry, please come back. I beg you. Even with his apology, it doesn't touch my heart at all. I won't extend a helping hand, and I definitely won't think about living together. Just stop it. I'm no longer your family. I'm a stranger, I said. Kathryn also began to apologize, following Henry. I'm sorry, please forgive me. We're family, so let's go home together. I was astounded by their self-serving talk. After treating me like a stranger for 12 years, now they want me back because we're family? That's too naive. It's just not happening. I couldn't stay calm anymore. My words flowed, driven by emotion. Harsh words escaped my lips, words I had held back out of consideration for Henry and Kathryn. I don't want to hear any excuses. I can't trust any words. I can't ever imagine us being a family again. At this point, I placed a piece of paper in front of Henry. It was a divorce paper already signed by me. Write on the divorce paper now. I'll go and submit it. Write it here. Henry shook his head from side to side. Then he showed me a smile. Think it over, will you? I was astounded by Henry's lack of grace in handling the situation. Such a small-minded man. I had always misunderstood Henry's ingratiating smile. The smile he showed when we first met was a sleazy expression of sizing someone up. I mistook it for the smile of a kind person. It still makes me angry thinking about it. I stood up and called my parents from the back. My parents appeared in the living room. Henry's mouth was agape as if his jaw had fallen off. My father glared sharply at Henry, and my mother also had a stern look on her face. Henry shrunk back just from their gaze. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the trouble caused by Teresa's misdeed. I thought I heard it wrong. What kind of mind is Henry's? He's still trying to shift responsibility. My father and mother's eyebrows twitched, but he remained silent. Teresa, no. Miss Teresa left the house on her own. I was just trying to persuade her to come back, right, Kathryn? Henry was prompting Kathryn to agree with his nonsense. Teresa's misdeed? Don't be ridiculous. My father's loud voice echoed through the house. The windows rattled. Henry and Kathryn gasped and held their breath. My father stood in front of Henry, bent down to meet his gaze. How could you interpret Teresa's actions as selfish? You only think about yourself. You're such a small man. Then my father turned to Kathryn. It seems you've done some terrible things too, going along with this man. What did you think of Teresa? Fools. My father's loud voice echoed through the house. Kathryn was trembling, perhaps terrified. My father stood up, glaring at the two of them in a commanding stance. Kathryn, you've been causing problems at school too. I've looked into it through my father's connections. A detective agency investigated Kathryn. It turned out she had been forcefully taking money from a girl at school. The victim was too scared to tell anyone, but my father had arranged to prepare a criminal complaint. Kathryn, just like how she looked down on me, was doing the same at school. Kathryn exclaimed, "That's a lie! Did she tell on me?" I felt like I saw Kathryn's true nature. No remorse at all. She was only thinking about getting through this situation. "Henry, you too. You've been embezzling money from the company. This was also discovered through the detective agency's investigation." Henry had been faking business trips. I initiated this investigation to strengthen my divorce case, but it unearthed shocking facts about both of them. "Why would you even—" Henry reacted the same as Kathryn, with no remorse. They were both unrepentant. "They won't just face my punishment, they deserve consequences too." Then my mother spoke up. "All right, the discussion is over. Sign the divorce papers and leave this house as soon as possible." Henry, sobbing, kept muttering, "I don't want to." But he seemed to give up when my father handed him a pen. He sat down and signed the divorce papers. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 7:30 p.m. "The last train leaves at 8 p.m. If they miss it, there won't be another train until the morning. In this small town, there are no taxis. If they don't catch the last train, Henry and Kathryn won't make it to the demolition scheduled for tomorrow." They probably hadn't packed anything, thinking they could persuade me. As I hesitated to tell them, Kathryn suddenly blurted out something unbelievable in a silky tone. "But this divorce was your idea, right, Dad? You should get a lot of money." Kathryn, having been exposed, seemed to become defiant. Both my parents looked shocked. "That's impossible. What you've done is essentially domestic violence, a crime." Kathryn was momentarily taken aback, but then defiantly retorted, "Show me the proof." I placed a notebook on the table. "This is a diary I started keeping since I got married." Kathryn glared at me with a scornful look. "You don't even have a smartphone or computer. What kind of evidence could you possibly have?" "A diary is a valid form of evidence, you know, not just video, audio, or pictures." Kathryn looked utterly astonished. "That's right. Even the lawyer acknowledged it. This diary is substantial evidence." Henry and Kathryn, seemingly resigned, hung their heads in defeat. I dramatically checked my watch. "Well, you've missed the last train. You won't be able to get home tonight." My mother looked at Henry and Kathryn with a smug expression. "That's right, there are no taxis around here. I wonder if there's even a decent hotel nearby." "All right, we're done here. Get out now." Henry and Kathryn were hurried out of the house from the second-floor balcony. I could see them rushing toward the station, probably shocked that the last train left so early. Watching their flustered figures, I felt the weight in my heart starting to lift. Some loose ends remained, but I felt a sense of closure. Henry and Kathryn, having missed the last train, couldn't find a taxi and ended up walking for about an hour to find a hotel. When they got home the next day, the demolition was already underway, but they managed to salvage only their clothes. Unbeknownst to them, I had temporarily stored the furniture, appliances, and my belongings in a warehouse. Later, I received a report from my lawyer that the divorce, including the alimony claim, was finalized. Henry, initially reluctant to pay, complied after pressure was applied to his company. According to the detective agency, Henry was fired for embezzlement, and Kathryn's scandal led to her expulsion from high school, ruining her chances for college. Henry, now jobless, could only afford to rent a small old apartment far from the station. There he lives with Kathryn, who dropped out of high school. Kathryn blames everything on Henry, and he constantly criticizes her, leading to endless arguments as reported by the detective agency. I had quit my part-time job at the real estate agency and was considering my next move when my father suggested I help with the family business. I took a job at his resort property management company. Living in a resort area is a big change from city life, but being surrounded by nature has been refreshing. I also have a dog, so I don't feel lonely living alone for now. This dog is all the family I need. I plan to live a peaceful life, just me and my dog. Let's conclude the story shortly. The demolition of the house was a symbolic act, a final break from the past. As the dust settled and the debris was cleared, a sense of peace settled over me. I had finally found my voice, my strength, and my independence. It was a long and painful journey, but I emerged stronger and wiser. I continued working at my father's company, thriving in the new environment. My dog, a loyal companion, brought joy and laughter into my life. I had a new home, a new job, and a new sense of purpose. The memories of Henry and Kathryn faded into the background, replaced by a newfound sense of freedom and self-worth. The old lady they had mocked and dismissed was gone, replaced by a woman who had found her path. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that I was finally home, not just in a place, but in myself. After experiencing the full journey of our story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How did the story resonate with you? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay blessed. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.